dream alive is to change the culture on Beacon Hill. Right now, we have a one party that's dominating all of the decision-making in every elected office at the top level and a majority in the state legislature. And it's that one-party domination that is not allowing for the debate, for the open discussion, and the real analysis of how we need to change things going forward. And it will only come about when we introduce, like our founding fathers intended, checks and balances back into our state government. The people in this state certainly deserve better, and I believe the most important qualification for treasurer is to be that independent thinker, someone that is not beholden to the one party that's dominated the decision-making on Beacon Hill, like my opponent, who has been the former chair of the Democratic National Party, someone steeped and mired in Democratic Party politics, and I believe is too compromised to be that independent treasurer. And to be that independent-minded person that will stand up and do what is right for the people. I have a solid record that I can stand on and that I will speak to with all of you this morning. I thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to the discussion so that we can highlight the differences between us.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, before we start some of the questions from the panel, I will tell you that you're, of course, listening to this live on WXBR Radio 1460. You can watch it live through our video webcast on ronvandam.com. And Brockton Community Cable Television, Brockton Community Access, is videotaping this as well, and that can be seen on your local Channel 12 at just about any time starting this evening and the next day. General Manager Mark Lindy and his staff are kind enough to provide that service for viewers. We're going to begin with Vicki Downing from the Enterprise News with the first question.
Thanks, Ron. I'm going to assume that most people listening to the radio and watching you on TV or on the Internet have not had the opportunity to closely follow the state treasurer's race, much as we'd all like to be involved and pay attention to political office and so forth. People are busy. What I'm most interested in is how you got to this point. You mentioned a little bit about your backgrounds, but I'd like to know a little bit more. Where'd you go to school? What brought you to this stage in life? You both mentioned businesses. What specifically do your businesses do? How many people do they employ? That kind of thing. I think you go first.
Steve Grossman will have the first response.
Thank you for the question. What got me to this point? Well, I'm privileged to have two parents who thought that education was extraordinarily important, so they gave me the opportunity to go to Princeton University, and I graduated from Harvard Business School in 1969. So I have an MBA from Harvard Business School. I came into our family business after a period of active service in the United States Army Reserves, and I've been in business now for over 40 years. And during those 40 years, I've had the privilege of working on serious problems and issues that affect all businesses. And I'm a small business person. That's what I've done all my life. And small business is the backbone of this Commonwealth. 70% of the jobs in Massachusetts are created in the small business sector. So I keep asking myself, if small businesses are in trouble during this recession, what can I do as a game changer to affect small businesses and help create jobs and economic growth among small businesses? And as I studied the job of treasurer, and I saw that the treasurer is responsible for all the cash that comes into the state, all the cash that goes out, pays all the bills, is responsible for the school building authority, $1.6 billion of annual construction, oversees the lottery, which is a $4.5 billion business, $900 million of local aid back to our cities and towns. I said, this is a job whose full potential can be used to help create jobs and to revitalize small businesses. And there's some very specific ways we can do that. The best idea I think I've come up with, and even Richard Tassay, the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor, in a forum recently at Suffolk University, when asked what's a good idea that the other side offered, he said Steve Grossman's idea to move money from the biggest banks in America that haven't been lending to small businesses, to small banks, to help those small banks lend money to help small businesses grow. So that's a little bit about my background that gives me both the education, my MBA at Harvard Business School, and the training for the last 40 years to use this job for its full potential to help revitalize small businesses and create jobs.
Thank you. Karyn, Polito.
Yes, I've been born and raised in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, which is right in the central part of the state, just outside of Worcester. And my upbringing was always around community. My grandfather, who was 95, is a great man. He served as a school committee member in Shrewsbury. And he and I always talked around the kitchen table about issues of concern. And I was always curious about how to solve them, how things worked. So he's the one that inspired me to get involved in local government. I ran as a town meeting member after I graduated from New England School of Law in 1991. Before that, Boston College School of Management. And I came back to my hometown, and I wanted to get involved. I saw that things had changed from the days that I was growing up there. So I ran for town meeting member, became a member of the zoning board, served on our Board of Selectmen for 3 years. And it was through that process that I really gained a greater understanding of the value of local government, your police, your fire, your education, the core services that really impact people's quality of life. And it was after that, during that time, that I worked as a lawyer for 10 years in private practice in Worcester, particularly in the real estate area, did some litigation as well. Then I transitioned into my family business that I own and operate with them today, and I've been doing that for 10 years. And it was through that I also continued my service as a state representative, because I'm concerned about the direction of our state, and I know that we need those checks and balances on Beacon Hill to get to better outcomes for our cities and towns, for the small businesses that are the background and the backbone of our economy, and that they're not getting a fair shake on Beacon Hill.
Thank you. Now our next question will come from Lisa Crowley, the Brockton Post, and that'll be directed toward Karyn Polito.
Good morning, candidates. Thank you for having me, Kevin and Ron. Steve Grossman in a number of forums has mentioned the bidding process and opening that up to smaller businesses throughout the state. Candidate Polito, what do you think of that idea, and will it work? And Candidate Grossman, what's preventing them from doing that now, and how can you change that?
Well, there's a few things to do at the Treasury, obviously, to make some improvements. Relative to the proposal that you're talking about, I believe it is important to utilize the state deposits and allow for community banks, more local banks, to have the opportunity to fairly bid on holding those deposits so that they, under their own terms, can lend out that money and stimulate the local economy. I agree with that approach. I disagree with my opponent's proposal to utilize pension funds and putting the pension fund further at risk through a program that he wishes to expand, which is more of an activist type of treasurer, which I would not be. I'm a fiscal conservative through and through, and with regard to our pension fund, we need to reach the highest rate of return without compromising the beneficiaries of the fund and the taxpayers who are paying $1.4 billion each year to prop up the public pension fund. So I would not use pension funds as my opponent would do with one of his proposals that is on his website. I would utilize the deposits of the Commonwealth to help stimulate the economy. But I also agree that the best way to create a climate to grow jobs in the Commonwealth is to lower taxes, reduce government spending, particularly wasteful spending, and also get a better control of our state's borrowing. We are number 2 in the country for the highest amount of debt per capita and as a measure of percentage of your income. That's a high amount of debt that's crowding out operating dollars that need to be directed, again, to local aid, to our schools, and to those most vulnerable. And if we continue down this path with the liberal policies of this administration that my opponent supports, we will continue to raise taxes, take on more borrowing, and increase spending beyond our control, which is hurting our economy. That's why just today I read in the paper that a company that my opponent is affiliated with, it's his business partner, and on the campaign trail he has touted the creation of jobs under this entity, National Envelope, has announced today that these jobs are gone. 160 jobs under my opponent's watch are gone in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and largely because of the tax and spend and borrowing policies that are hurting our economy here in Massachusetts.
And now an equal amount of time from Steve Grossman.
Let's get to job creation. I'm sure we'll talk about job creation. I believe the question had to do with the bidding policies and how we can save the taxpayers' money. So let me address your question directly. What I've said is that everything that the Treasurer is responsible for, every single contract that the Treasurer oversees at the lottery and at the pension reserve funds, needs to be put out to public bid within the first 6 months. And I'll do that. Every law firm that does securities litigation work, every law firm that does bond counsel work, every pension management firm, and there are over 100 of them, they have to be examined. They have to be looked at again. In the state of Maryland, my friend Peter Francho, who's the controller, opened up the bidding process to smaller firms, emerging firms, women-owned firms, minority-owned firms, that all had a distinguished track record. They all had a track record, excuse me, of managing public funds or managing endowment funds. Those firms now manage over $2 billion. They've saved money, and they've outperformed the bigger managers. So we need to bid out every service that we're responsible for within the first 6 months, rebid it out within every 2 years, put up on a public website the entire bidding process so that every citizen knows exactly how those bidding procedures are working, without regard to whether anybody's ever given a dime politically to anybody in this Commonwealth. And also, let's make sure that if we go down the route of casino gambling, etc., next January, if we relook at that, any license that is given out by this Commonwealth has to be fully publicly bid out. There should be no private deals or inside deals. Bid everything out, save millions or tens of millions of dollars. I do that in my own business. I've done that for over 40 years. We've done that for 100 years. So I have some experience of using complicated bidding rules to help save money, and that's what the taxpayers of the state need and deserve.
Karyn, Polito, did you want to respond?
Yes, because the issue is regarding bidding and the issue of expanded gaming. Let me just speak to that for a minute. I not only talk the talk, I walk the walk. I have a solid record of having supported expanded gaming. However, I voted against Speaker DeLeo's bill for expanded gaming that called for basically an inside deal for the racetracks in the Commonwealth. Although I support expanded gaming, it was not a good bill because it didn't have an open and competitive bidding process, which I fought for on the floor of the House of Representatives. And despite that effort, and despite the overall dysfunction on Beacon Hill, the expanded gaming bill didn't even make its way through to the governor. But it's not only just in the state treasury, but it's across the board that we have corruption, we have scandals on Beacon Hill, we have 3 speakers that have left under disgrace, all part of a majority party that is too much in control, not enough checks and balances on Beacon Hill. And with the treasurer's office, it should be the watchdog role for the people and their money and to serve as that check and balance on Beacon Hill.
And let me just take my 30 seconds or less to simply say this. The question was about how do you save taxpayers' money and how do you act as a watchdog. Every single thing that the treasurer is responsible for at the lottery and at the pension fund needs to be bid out. Public bidding should be the rule and not the exception. There should be no inside deals, no special contracts, no special favors. That's the kind of work that I've done in my business life for 35 years, in my philanthropic and community life. That's exactly the set of values and the high standards I'll bring to this job if I'm privileged to be the treasurer-elect on the morning of November 3rd.
Our next question comes from WXBR News producer Kevin Tachi.
Well, thank you, candidates, for coming here to WXBR and being a part of this forum. First and foremost, when it comes to state pensions, the 2 questions that I want to ask. What areas need to be reformed, and what would you do to diversify and better invest the pension fund?
Steve Grossman.
Well, reform is something that is talked about a lot, but not done as often as it needs to be. I've laid out on my website, which is stevegrossman.com, and I hope people will take a look, a whole series of reforms that add up to a couple of $2 billion, $2 billion over the next 30 years that would be saved in terms of a whole series of reforms. Now, $2 billion against an unfunded pension liability of $20 billion is a small amount of money, but it's a strong down payment, and it's a message to the people of this Commonwealth that business as usual doesn't work anymore. For example, we have a former Senate president who has a pension of $198,000 a year. I think that's outrageous. I think we should cap pensions. I happen to believe that pensions should be capped at $85,000. Those are for new state workers moving forward, inflation adjusted, not for people who are already in the system or retirees, because the Supreme Judicial Court already said can't do that. There are other outrageous practices that are engaged in which we got to eliminate. Something called spiking, where somebody jumps up into a job at the end of a career and winds up with a significantly greater pension because of the way pensions are calculated. So we've got to change that, and there's a whole series of very specific reforms, anti-spiking, pension caps, raising retirement age for workers going forward. That's specifically how you engage in pension reform. This has got to be done by the legislature, but I will use the bully pulpit of the state treasurer to push for those reforms, and as the chairman of the state retirement board, with a seat on the teachers retirement board, and as the person who runs those pension funds, or at least chairs that board, I think I'm in a unique position to use that bully pulpit to rein in these practices and to help pension reform become the law of this Commonwealth.